Alright, hello and welcome to this build guide for the Shatter Strike Spellblade. This build is very powerful. In fact, it's so powerful that we had to wait for the patch notes to determine whether or not we were going to release it, because there was some concern that Lost Knowledge would get nerfed. Lost Knowledge is a passive that allows you to build up ward based upon your max mana as long as you're using a 40 mana cost or higher skill, and it does insane amount of wards if you build your mana high enough. And so we thought there was a decent chance it was going to get nerfed, and if it did, would it still be strong enough? Well, turns out it didn't get nerfed at all. So this build is very strong. This is one of the best ward generators in the game, and it also does a lot of damage. It is extremely tanky, especially in its flame ward uptime periods. So yeah, this is a build that's going to be really good for a lot of people. If you like the play style, if you want to be incredibly tanky, it does have a lot of heavy investment to get it to where it's going to feel really good all around every way. Get all of the damage, get all of the ward generation. There is a lot to it. There's a lot of stats that are important. There's a lot of uniques and sets that are valuable for it. This is probably not a good starter, although you can do it, but without Vessel of Strife, it can feel a little difficult early on in a map or on a boss before you built your ward up. There's an easy fix for that, which is just use Shatter Strike a few times before you engage an enemy. But if you engage an enemy too early, you have very little HP, so if you don't have your ward generation up, then you could be in trouble. Vessel of Strife solves this by giving us a lot of front end ward. Vessel of Strife is a hard item to get because it requires a tier 4 Jolra kill. So generally, if you already have a Vessel of Strife, you're better off running this build, but you can run it without. It'll just take a little bit of strategy change to make sure you have some ward generated before you start engaging enemies. If you do that, you should be generally good. You just make sure you keep your ward up, use Shatter Strike as needed. But once you have this, it's even smoother. So definitely recommend this unique for the playstyle. All right, let's go ahead and get into all the details of this build, and we will start with the pros and cons. So on the pros side, we have great clear. This has a good AoE size. It's very fast attacking, so it clears really well. It's easy to play. It doesn't have like a tremendously hard rotation to use it. Great scaling with gear and uniques. Very good scaling with gear and uniques, some of the best I'd say in the game. Excellent single target and defense. Definitely its biggest strengths are it's really good in single target and it's crazy on defense. The downsides, it does have mana management. You're going to run out of mana using Shatter Strike by design. You're going to be burning through your mana. Then you have to regen it either through Mana Strike or through Focus. We use Mana Strike here, but we also show you how to use Focus if you want to go that route. It has heavy gear investment. That's the downside of having great scaling with gear, is you want to invest a lot in it. It has a DPS downtime after you burst your Shatter Strike, so you have to rebuild. It can feel kind of bad, and it also creates windows of vulnerability on defense when you're in these DPS downtime periods, because you're not building massive amounts of ward with Shatter Strike, because you're trying to use Mana Strike or Focus to get your mana back. They're not huge windows, and they can be circumvented somewhat. You can keep track of your ward and make sure you're fine, but it is a downside. If you get hit a lot during that period of time, you could find yourself low on ward and potentially dead. So let's go ahead and get into the skills and passives. All right, starting with the skills, of course we have Shatter Strike here. Shatter Strike does a lot of damage thanks to the ability to build up just a ton of crit chance from Cold Steel. We have 30% per point here. This is actually, I think, a 5 point, so 4 or 5 point. I think it's 120 or 150 per sword, and then of course double that by 2 because we're going to use 2 swords. It's a ton of damage. In fact, here's Cold Steel at 4 here, so 120, so 240% crit multi from one node, which is just insane. Like I think it's the highest probably in the game. If not, it's very close. And we have some damage multipliers as well from Breath of Cold and Absolute Zero. We then take white. We have to take white out, which is the one that causes it to recast. We do it twice. We take that because we need to get over 40 mana. This puts us at 42. It's also a really good node to have anyway. It's good damage. And then all of that together allows us to do a lot of damage and also activate Lost Knowledge to have a ton of ward. In this version, we're using Mana Strike. I like Mana Strike better because it has better potential to give you ward back consistently. So there's a focus version that we do talk about in the more advanced section here, the alternative skills and tips, that will give you your mana back in a burst, but it has a 10-second cooldown on it. And I find, especially in bosses, that you burn through mana so quickly on this build that you kind of stand around with nothing to do for several seconds while you're waiting for that to come back. And you can't get your full mana, so you can't do like a full burst on the enemy with your enchant weapon buff up and potentially flame ward if you do it for offense. So I consider that to be a worse setup than this. And we get a bunch of mana from this, and we also get guaranteed crits, which also give us mana. So this gives a ton of mana back, and it gives it back quickly, especially with our attack speed. We're using teleport here. One of the main features of teleport in this setup is that you become stun immune for 80% of for about 7 seconds, I believe. So as long as we use it every 7 seconds, we can't be stunned, which means that the enemies can't stop us from using Shatter Strike and generating ward, which is definitely a huge benefit. If you get stunned in this build, it's going to be a bad time. So we can prevent ourselves from being stunned. We also get armor and some cold resistance from this as well. Next up, we've got Flame Ward. This is a staple of basically every Sorc build. It's no different here. Excuse me, every mage build. It's no different here. We get the +1 charge. We get the less hit damage. We're not taking elemental damage taking here. You can get this and get even tankier, but honestly, to me, it's complete overkill. Not everyone agrees with me on this. Some people think this is an absolute must take. I just don't think it's necessary for this particular build because it's just so tanky that elemental damage will probably never really kill you as long as if you're actually using Flame Ward and you're generating ward from Shatter Strike, it's going to be pretty much impossible to kill. So this just doesn't feel, if this could be used during a downtime when these aren't available, I would be more interested in it, but you can't. So I think this is plenty with barrier. And then we can either build for damage. In this setup, we've got Frost Ward, which is going to allow us to turn this into cold damage. So we have 200% increased cold damage. But you could also get out of this and go into Flame Runner if you wanted to go faster throughout Echoes. You're going to be pretty fast in Echoes, especially with the sword we use, which gives us DSI, 20% move speed. This gives you another 30% move speed, and it can be refreshed with Teleport, so you can keep it full uptime if you want Flame Runner. But in our current scenario, this is full damage. In the alternative skills and tips, you can see how to do it with Flame Runner instead. The next thing we have is Enchant Weapon, which is just a supercharger basically for our damage. Celerity gives us 50% melee attack speed. It gives us more damage just as a baseline, so it's already pretty crazy. And then we also get a bunch of added melee cold damage and increased melee cold damage. We have a higher duration on this one, and we have increased melee elemental damage and minus mana cost, which isn't huge, but it helps. And finally, we have cleanse ailments on it. All right, that is the skills. Let's go to the passives. The passives are going to revolve a lot around having lost knowledge early on to get a bunch of mana back. That is an absolute must take, and take it early, as it is set up in here to be that way. If you follow along with the way we take our points here, it's just huge. We're going to get some attack speed from Mage Floor and Essence Duel. If you need your resistances, we're going to get them from Arcanist and Elemental Affinity, which we do take. Infused Weapon and Prismatic Blade offer us more added damage. That's really good. Volka's Razor is a pretty significant damage buff, up to 150%. For anything that costs 10 or more mana, we cost 42, so we're in that group. Arcane Shielding and Shattered Aegis is really good defensive stuff, increased armor, and also just a damage reduction, so we always want that. Warden for ward retention is pretty big because we want to get as much ward retention as we can get so that our ward lasts longer and can go higher. And then Knowledge of Destruction kind of just helps us with our crit chance and gives us a little bit of crit multi, what we don't really need, but we're going to want a crit cap, so if we need to be crit capped, we'll take Knowledge of Destruction towards the end. All right, let's talk about the gameplay. This is the general rotation. It's a pretty easy one. You buff yourself with Teleport. You cast Enchant Weapon when you need it for damage to increase it. You can just absolutely annihilate enemies by turning this on, just doing a few Shatter Strikes. Attack with Shatter Strike until the enemy's dead or you're out of mana. This will be removed. I'm not sure why it's in there. Then use Mana Strike or Focus to gain your mana back. Use Flame Ward defensively before you take damage. And then refresh your teleport defensive buffs by casting it before they expire. Mapping is just group as many enemies as you can get, then use enchant weapon on anything that's larger, that needs to be killed quicker or has a higher amount of HP, and then teleport to get out of dangerous stuff and keep your buffs up. Bossing, we're gonna use enchant weapon, and if you want to do extra damage, use enchant weapon with flame ward or save it for incoming damage, up to you. I generally use them both together because it doesn't really matter. By the time I'm all the way through Shatter Strike, I've got 15,000 plus ward and I'm good to go until the next run. So, and also we have 2 charges of flame ward, so if you put them both together, you get an insane amount of damage. So you just pop those, and then you're going to just Shatter Strike all the way down till you have no mana. And then you're going to Mana Strike or Focus back up. Again, I prefer Mana Strike personally because I can go all the way back to full. Then I can use Enchant Weapon again when it comes available and do another burn phase. All right, let's go ahead and get on to gear, blessings, and idols. All right, we'll start with gear. Here are your stat goals: capped res, capped crit avoidance. You want a lot of ward retention so you can maintain your ward and build it. Big health regen, what's that for? That's primarily for your Vessel of Strife, so that's actually building you a lot of ward. Also, we don't leech in this build because we're using Peak of the Mountain, so it'll also help you with your health if you happen to fall that far below. Hopefully you don't. We want about 30 to 40% armor pre-buffs, about 2,000 out of combat ward when you can get to it. It's going to take you a while. With Vessel of Strife, even you might find yourself only to 1,000, 1,500. That's fine. Just keep pushing it up there and try to get to 2,000 plus. 800 plus mana, ideally 1,000 plus if you can get there, but it takes a lot of work. It's going to run really well before that. I think on the videos I was showing you there, I think it was only like 700, and it was just annihilating the content. So this is an ideal, not necessary to run it. You want capped crit chance, you want some increased attack speed, you want some increased damage, you want some added melee cold damage, and then you want some move speed. All right. As far as gear, I'm not going to spend too much time on the starter or advanced because, to be honest with you, this build takes a lot of work to get it to where you want it to be, and you aren't going to want to spend too much time in here. You're really going to want to have your gear, especially Vessel Strife, if you can get it. But this stuff is also pretty standard stuff. Get your crit avoidance, so on and so forth. Get some mana in this particular case for Lost Knowledge instead of worrying about health. Farm Peak of the Mountain when you can to get yourself a lot more crit. You're going to want that pretty early. And be on the lookout for Grand Glass idols with mana and armor. Ideally, if you can get mana as a prefix and mana and armor as a suffix, you are golden. I don't have one of these yet. I have plenty of armor and mana, and not an armor, mana, and mana, so that's an area where I can still grow a lot on this build. As far as the advance, we're adding Shard of the Shattered Lance to it, and we are looking for +2 to Shatter Strike to give ourselves even more attack speed. That's pretty much the big things here. Also, Fairbore's Persistence. Let me talk about these 2 set items actually real quick. This offers a ton of int, which is both damage and ward retention, and a bunch of health regen, and a bunch of armor. And it's got a good base with necrotic resistance and ward retention. This is an awesome ring to have one. You probably can't fit 2 because you're going to need crit chance, but have one of these in your build. And then Shard of the Shattered Lance gives you the health regen, the melee cold damage, and the Deicide. Deicide gives you 20% more move speed and damage after you have killed a rarer boss for 15 seconds. This is really, really good for echoes. This is technically not as good for bosses, but the health regen is still there, so I do recommend keeping it for bosses. But if you want to go full hardcore on it, you can just do 2 crystal swords like this with like the big melee crit or something else there. You can honestly do cold damage there instead. Melee cold damage, you can do crit multi there. Probably do increase cold damage. We have so much crit multi. Your melee cold, chill, shred, all that stuff, you can just do 2 of those if you want to, and you can actually do probably a bit more damage on bosses, but this is definitely better for echoes and pretty close on even on bosses. All right, so that's the advanced stuff. Let's go into endgame gear and talk about this a bit. Again, Vessel Strife, really good for making sure that you have a good general health pool, EHP pool, call it, because it's actually ward. Get you around 2,500 to 3,000 just sitting there, standing there, not doing anything. That way, when you walk up to an enemy, it can't one-shot you. So this is really important for that reason. Remember, this also always rolls with legendary potential, so it's easy to make a legendary out of it. You probably won't get a +2 or +3, but a +1 is it's not only reasonable, it's guaranteed. So it's pretty easy to get this to be a very good item. You have to farm it on tier 4 Jilra though, and that is the problem because tier 4 Jilra is a pain in the butt. But it can be done. It can be done by this build. Once you start building your ward up, it's going to be pretty good at it. And once you get this item, this is a great tier 4 dungeon farmer. We also are adding Strand of Souls here. It's just got a bunch of really good stats. The big one being ward retention. Ward per second is really good on it too. If you can get health regen on this, that's awesome. That'll be a huge boost to this item as well. As far as the let's just talk about real quick getting legendary on the peak of the mountain. Mana, health regen is definitely ideal here if you can get that. Intelligence is also good here. Dexterity is also good here. The other exalteds, we want a lot of mana throughout this build, so we're going to be prioritizing mana. Remember, that's our big defense here, and it also gives you a larger pool to do a larger burst of damage during that enchant window uptime, enchant weapon uptime. So we definitely want to push that as far as we can. We want +2 to Shatter Strike, not +3 or +4. It's just not very beneficial. Mana is more beneficial in here. One weird thing on this build is we put elemental resistance in the suffix slot on body armor. That's very unusual. It's just kind of the way the stats work out on this because we're pushing health regen instead of health. It just works better. It helps us to get our resistance up there. We don't want health, or well, it's not we don't want it, it's just not that valuable to us. It's not nearly as valuable as health regen, so we're going to put elemental resistance here if we can. The weapon, we want added melee crit chance here, tier 6, tier 7 if you can get it. That's really important. Melee cold damage, chill shred, melee stun chance if you can seal it. It should be pretty easy to get these 4 stats on this item. The only really hard part will be to get the exalted version. The other ring, we're pushing our crit, intelligence, dexterity. We're also getting poison res here. This is the only time I've ever done an exalted resistance. The reality is you don't need it to be exalted. Poison is almost certainly not going to kill you in this build. It's just you regen so much ward, you generate so much ward that a dot is just not going to do it to you. But hey, any extra we can get is great. So if you find exalted poison resistance, go for it. If not, don't worry about it. Just make sure you have like 45% poison resistance, 45%, and you're good to go. To be honest, you're really good to go there. Then health regen on the suffix, so we're going to put that all over the place. Add it and increase. Increase critical strike on the gloves. We just don't need the suffixes that much. We do need the crit strike, so we're going to go that way. And then your boots are, move speed, intelligence, health regen, and then if you can seal some armor, they're great. Also, the +1 on body armor to cast Flame Ward is great. If you can get that, it'll just give you an extra when you start a fight out. That's really good for you. Okay, Bis is going to be very similar. It's just going to be better versions of it, higher legendaries. If you can get a 4 LP on Peak of the Mountain, that'll be a lot of fun. But nothing crazy in here, nothing crazy changes. You're basically looking for kind of the same stuff, just better. Okay, let's talk about blessings. The first blessing let's go in our order here. Let's go in order. The first thing you're gonna get is critical strike avoidance, so you can cap it. This is just an easy, definitely want to get it. Makes it really easy for you to cap with either 1 tier 5 or just the body armor that we have in here. The next one we've got is Grand Light of the Moon. This is big mana. Should be pretty obvious at this point why you want that. You want as much mana as you can get. This gives you a ton of it. Grand Winds of Oblivion, I have in here for crit cap. Yeah, I think under ideal circumstances, what you'll go with. However, Void Resistance is also really good here, just to take that resistance away from being needed anywhere else. If you find yourself needing Void Resistance, go with this and go back for Grand Winds of Oblivion later if you can fit it in. Either one of these is fine. Grand Rage of Winter for Shred Cold Resistance is another 20% damage against bosses and more against non-bosses. Not that you need it, but against bosses is great. If you want to go more defense, Grand Bulwark the Tundra is an excellent option. Both of these are really good. Go with whichever one you like better. As far as the last thing we're going to do Grand Body Obsidian. This is definitely a want. There's nothing better here in this slot. Take this, get the added armor. It's going to give you more damage reduction. It's going to fit really well with Shattered Aegis, and it's going to fit really well with Throne of Ambition. As far as idols go, we definitely want a Throne of Ambition. You can take this off when you're not bossing if you want to. It's not necessary. It's extra work, extra tedium. You can just keep this on. It'll give you a little bit of buff on rares, but it won't make a big difference otherwise. If you need to fill in extra resistances, this is a place to do it, and then put this on for bosses. But I just keep mine on, honestly. It's just the build does so much damage. It does so much. It performs at such a high rate. It's just not necessary to remove this, but up to you. Your glass idols, and also we have a ornate ornate idol, your grand idols, your grand glass and your ornate glass idols. You can have either 4 grand or you can do the ornate. The difference between them is the grand has mana and armor mana, and then the ornate just has the armor mana with melee elemental damage. They're both really good. Up to you which one you want to do. If you could probably just be based on the drops you get. That's really where it's probably going to be. And then as far as here, we're going to fill in the resistances we need. The way I've got it set up right now, we're just going to use void resistance here, but of course your gear will differ from ideal, so put whatever resistance you want in here. If you go with the other small idol here, you can go with like armor or mana on the prefix. This one we go health regen on the Ateran. And then if you want to go like a 1x2 or 2x1, there's vitality and there's critical strike chance as prefixes. All right, let's move on to build scaling and endgame. We've covered a lot of the build scaling already, so we'll just go over this pretty quickly to kind of reaffirm what we're talking about here. Flat melee damage is good. Melee attack speed is good. You see where we get it on the gear. In fact, melee attack speed outside of the sword, I don't think we really need it in too many places because we get so much from other sources like our passive tree and from enchant weapon and even from Shatter Strike tree itself. You're gonna have a ton of attack speed, so that'll be easy to get. Cooldown reduction, we actually don't have this anywhere explicitly in the build, but it is really good. We went for more health regen here, but we can easily fit this in the boots, and it's really good there. That's up to you. If you want to have lower enchant weapon cooldown times and higher uptime, go CDR there. You can also put it on the belt with LP if you want to, and that's really good as well. Either way works. A little bit more damage with CDR, a little bit more tanky with health regen, up to you. The crystal sword is definitely the best in slot for the other slot that's not the set, the shattered lance. So definitely get one of those. Intelligence is great for this build. We want to stack a lot of it because it's both damage and ward retention. Dexterity gives both increased damage and flat, so it's really good, but take intelligence over it for the defensive buff. Throwing ambition, of course, we talked about that. Increased damage, we talked about that. Crit strike chance, definitely want to cap this because of the massive amounts of crit multi we have. It's really important to do that. We don't need to build a lot of crit multi because we already have so much from cold steel. But if you get more, than good. Shred armor is really important to have one source of it, preferably on your weapon. It could also be on your gloves, but you want it on your weapon. It's just the most efficient slot, and it's going to get you. I'm at 20,000 stacks on the build I showed, which is not even close to like a best in slot setup. So that's 58% increased damage, or more damage effectively. It's a 58% damage multiplier, so you definitely want that. Grand Rage a winner for the 20% increase in damage to bosses. That's the shred. And then we talked about Throne of Ambition already. Defense. We have CDR. We talked about that before. It's good for enchant weapon, but also for flame ward and teleport. Flame ward is huge. Just set it up and use it, and you're good to go. Arcane shielding. We're going to take this in the passive tree. It's really strong. Armor mitigation. We can get quite a bit of armor in this build, so we definitely want to stack that to some extent. Ward. This is a ward build. That's what it is. So we're obviously pushing ward. We're going to do it mostly through mana, but we're also going to do it through health regen and Vessel of Strife. That's how we're going to build our ward, and that's how we're going to be incredibly tanky. We don't care much about health. We care more about health regen, so don't worry about stacking health. Before you have Vessel of Strife, you can put some on, but don't worry about it once you get it. We talked about Vessel of Strife and how important it is, and it's really important, especially because of Peak of the Mountain, since we can't leech. So we're going to be building for health regen already, so we might as well use Vessel of Strife. Chill is really important. Frailty is really important for just about any build. This one's no different. Try to get those. Cleanse. We actually have a cleanse built in to enchant weapon, but you can also put one on your belt if you want to. As far as stunning and freezing, this build does a lot of both. It's a good CC. You don't really have to build for it. I think we have like one seal to fix devoted to stun. Outside of that, nothing else. You don't need to. It kills everything really quickly, and it's still going to do a lot of CC even without building into it. And then we're going to get stun immunity here from rock phase and teleport, so just make sure to keep that up. As far as the end game content goes, end game activities, it's good at everything. It just is. It's really good at everything. It's not the best at everything, but like it's really good at Monolith. You can go fast, especially if you take Flame Runner. But even without it, Shard of the Shatter Lance will give you good move speed, and you have teleport up, and you're really, really hard to kill, and you'll annihilate bosses. It's just really, really good at the monolith. It's exceptionally good at the dungeons because of its really high damage and its really, really high tankiness. You can tank most of the tier 4 boss, like the non like one-shot stuff. It can tank almost all of it, if not all of it. So just really good for it. This is one of the better builds for dungeons. Not like the absolute best. Minions are trashing it right now. Minions are trashing tier 4 all the dungeons and doing them in like sub 10 seconds, so they're technically the best. But outside of the stuff that's clearly really broken, this is up there amongst the best options for tier 4 dungeon running. And as far as arena, it's really good at arena, especially if you just switch it out to this one. You actually want to use focus because you want to not stand there and slapping things like while staring into their eyes from like 3 inches away, like you have to do with Mana Strike, because they're going to hit you back. And at higher scales of arena, that's going to be bad. So we just switch it out to focus, and this is a really good arena pusher. It's not going to be one of the very top ones, but it is a very good one because of all of the ward we can generate it with it. You'll just have to plan out your damage windows and do a lot more kiting, but this should be able to push you very high in the arena. So yeah, there's not any content this build struggles with. It's as long as you play it well, meaning if you're low on ward, you're not trying to kill enemies without, or like hit them with, you know, Mana Strike, or do something weird with low ward where you're not generating ward. As long as you don't do something like that, this is just going to be a really good build for really any content. Okay, that covers all of the major stuff. As always, we have a loot filter, so feel free to download that. It's customized for this build. It will find you the gear you need for this build. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great time with this build. It's such a strong build, so much fun. I hope you find it as fun as I did. Have a great time in Last Epoch, and I'll see you all again real soon.